Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. The world of Harry Potter is vast. Every character, every detail, even the tiniest scene is part of a grand mosaic, one that can hardly be contained within just 8 full-length films. So it's no surprise that the filmmakers had to make tough choices, cutting out characters, scenes, and even entire plot lines. Some of the omitted characters were actually very important. They added depth, revealed new sides of familiar characters, drove the plot forward, or simply gave the books their unique atmosphere. In this episode, I'll tell you about those who were left behind despite their significance. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Ludo Bagman. Ludovic Ludo Bagman, a former Quidditch player and head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports, was one of the key characters in the Goblet of Fire. He didn't just help organize the Triwizard Tournament, he was also the one with whom Fred and George made a bet on the outcome of the Quidditch World Cup. After losing the wager, Ludo tried to pay them with fake leprechaun gold and then avoided them altogether. He played a major role throughout the 4th book, constantly reappearing with his risky gambling, suspicious behavior, and shady dealings, raising doubts in both Harry and the reader. Yet despite all of this, Bagman was completely cut from the films. Number 2. Winky. Winky the house elf is a heartbreaking and poignant character tied to the Crouch family. She was dismissed after being found in the forest holding a wand that had just cast the dark mark. Her dismissal was a tragedy. Unlike Dobby, Winky never wanted freedom, and she spiraled into depression. Later, she ended up working in the Hogwarts kitchens, unable to come to terms with her fate. It was Winky's story that inspired Hermione to found SPEW, the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare. By removing Winky from the films, the filmmakers erased a key part of Hermione's development, her compassion, and her fight for justice. Number 3. Marietta Edgecomb. In the books, it is Marietta Edgecomb, Cho Chang's friend, who betrays Dumbledore's army to Umbridge. She does it not out of malice, but out of fear for her mother, who works for the Ministry of Magic. As punishment, Hermione enchanted the list of members, causing boils to appear on Marietta's face, spelling out the word sneak. The films cut Marietta completely and instead made Cho the traitor, allegedly under the influence of Veritaserum. This not only distorted Cho's character but also unfairly ruined her storyline with Harry. Number 4. Professor Binns. The only ghost teacher at Hogwarts, Professor Binns taught the history of magic and was so dull that he actually died in his sleep and continued teaching the next day without noticing he was dead. In the Chamber of Secrets, it was Binns who told Harry, Ron, and Hermione the legend of the heir of Slytherin and the origin of the chamber. Thanks to him, the trio understood what they were dealing with. In the films, this exposition was handed off to other characters, and Binns was left out entirely. Number 5. Charlie Weasley. One of Ron's older brothers, Charlie, was an important part of the Weasley family. He worked with dragons in Romania and was entrusted with the task of taking Norbert the dragon, raised by Hagrid, away from Hogwarts. Though Charlie is briefly mentioned and shown in a photograph in the 3rd film, he never appeared as a living character. His absence was particularly noticeable during the final battle, where he fought alongside his family in the books. Charlie is a reminder that even minor characters can bring warmth and realism to the Harry Potter universe. Number 6. Peeves, perhaps the most glaring omission. Peeves, the poltergeist, was a constant headache for Hogwarts staff. He caused chaos, tormented students, and especially annoyed caretaker Filch. Yet, in times of need, he always sided with the school. During Umbridge's reign, Peeves became a rebellious force of nature. Even Professor McGonagall helped him, at one point telling him how to unscrew a chandelier. In the final battle, he armed himself with furniture and attacked Death Eaters. Still, Peeves never made it into the films. He was even filmed for the first movie, played by Rick Mayall, but the scenes were cut and the character was forgotten. Number 7, Andromeda and Ted Tonks. Andromeda Tonks stood alone on the doorstep, holding a baby wrapped in blue. Her husband was dead, murdered by Death Eaters for being a Muggle born. Her daughter, Nymphadora, had fallen in the Battle of Hogwarts. Her son-in-law, Remus Lupin, died beside her. Andromeda was the last one standing. She had once been a black sister to Narcissa Malfoy and Bellatrix Lestrange, but she turned her back on that name, chose love instead, chose Ted Tonks, chose decency, and now she was raising their orphaned grandchild in silence. In the book, her grief is mentioned only briefly, but its weight is enormous. "Poor little Teddy," said Hermione, her voice cracking. "He'll have to live with his grandmother now." But that line carried a world. Andromeda had lost everyone. She had defied her entire family, been burned off the Black family tree, and still paid the ultimate price. Yet she endured. She raised Teddy Lupin not in bitterness, but in strength. No vengeance, no despair, just quiet love in the ruins of war. The films said nothing of her, not one frame. Ted Tonks was never shown, Andromeda was never named. The loss of both parents was left hanging, with no face to grieve, no arms to hold the child. A family erased, a sacrifice left unseen, and with it, the quiet courage of a woman who chose light over legacy and love over blood. Number 8. Hepzibah Smith. Hepzibah Smith offered Tom Riddle tea and treasure. She was wealthy, vain, and unaware that she was pouring tea for a monster. In her velvet sitting room, she showed him 2 relics, Helga Hufflepuff's cup and Salazar Slytherin's locket. "A real treasure, wouldn't you agree?" She beamed. Tom smiled. 2 days later, she was dead. The cup and locket were gone. Her house elf was framed, and the boy she had trusted disappeared without a trace. It was murder dressed as a visit. It was the moment Tom stopped pretending. The books give us this memory through Hokey, the elf, and Dumbledore's research. It's not just a clue, it's a turning point. These weren't just artifacts, they were symbols of Hogwarts itself. Riddle didn't want power, he wanted legacy. He wanted to tear out the heart of the school that shaped him and twist it into something dark. Each item he stole became a Horcrux. Hepzibah's death was not random, it was calculated, intimate, personal, a test of how far he would go to possess magic greater than himself. The films skipped her. They skipped the room, the cup, the smile. They reduced the Horcruxes to cursed trinkets with no soul behind them. Without Hepzibah, Voldemort's obsession feels hollow, but with her, it's clear he didn't just want immortality. He wanted to own the Founders, to become the final piece of Hogwarts by destroying what came before. Hepzibah Smith wasn't just a victim. She was the key to understanding how far Tom Riddle would go to rewrite history with his name. Number 9. Augusta Longbottom. Augusta Longbottom wore her pride like armor, tall hats, stiff collars, eagle-eyed stares. She raised Neville after his parents were tortured into madness, but she never coddled him. In her eyes, bravery meant living up to Frank and Alice. "You're not your father," she once said sharply. "Not yet." Neville wilted under her expectations, always wondering if he was enough, always trying. Her voice, like iron, echoed through his childhood, stern, unbending, and impossible to please. In the Deathly Hallows, when news reaches her that Neville is leading the Hogwarts resistance, Augusta doesn't scold. She doesn't worry. She joins. "They'll have me to deal with now," she tells a Death Eater who comes looking for her. She storms the school in her hat and cloak, wand at the ready. It's the moment Neville becomes her equal, not because he suddenly fits her mold, but because she finally sees the strength he carried all along. In that moment, she is no longer the commander. She is the proud grandmother of a hero. The films never showed it. Augusta was left behind, mentioned only in passing. Her transformation from a cold guardian to a fearless ally was never filmed, and so Neville's growth lost one of its most powerful reflections. We saw him become a leader, but we never saw the woman who once doubted him look him in the eye and say without words, "You are enough." Number 10. Frank and Alice Longbottom. Neville. Longbottom's bravery didn't begin at Hogwarts. It was born in the quiet, sterile corridors of St. Mungo's Hospital. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry stumbles into a ward meant for the broken. There, he sees Neville with his grandmother. And then he sees them, Frank and Alice Longbottom, his parents, alive but gone. Alice shuffles forward and presses a candy wrapper into Neville's hand. That's all she remembers how to give. "Thanks, Mum," Neville whispers, not looking at anyone. He folds the wrapper and puts it in his pocket like treasure. No one speaks. Frank and Alice were heroes once, auras who fought Voldemort without fear. They were captured after the Dark Lord fell, tortured by Bellatrix Lestrange until their minds shattered. The books make it clear, Voldemort's terror didn't end with his first fall. It left families in ruins. Neville grew up not just without parents, but with living reminders of what was taken. His pain was quiet, unlike Harry's. He never wore it like a scar. He carried it in silence. The films mention them only in passing. A single line, no hospital, no candy wrapper, no scene of Neville gently taking his mother's gift. Without it, viewers never truly understood why he fought so fiercely, why the Sorting Hat almost placed him in Gryffindor. That moment in the hospital wasn't just sad, it was defining. It told us who Neville was long before he drew the sword of Gryffindor, because some heroes aren't shaped by destiny, they're shaped by what they've lost, by watching someone they love fade away day by day and still standing tall. Neville's courage came not from prophecy or fame, but from grief and loyalty. And in leaving Frank and Alice out, the films left out the true reason Neville Longbottom was never just comic relief. He was a survivor, just like Harry, just quieter. Number 11, the Gaunts, Marvolo and Morphin. In a crumbling shack hidden deep in the countryside, Harry watched through Dumbledore's memory as the roots of evil twisted into view. Marvolo Gaunt sat in filth, gripping a ring engraved with the symbol of the Deathly Hallows, shouting about bloodlines. His daughter, Merab, trembled in silence. His son, Morphin, hissed in Parseltongue and laughed at violence. "She's a squib," Marvolo snarled, dragging Merab by the hair. It was the first time readers saw where Voldemort came from. Not a throne, not a prophecy, but a house of rage. Marvolo was obsessed with ancestry. "We're the last of the line," he barked, referring to the blood of Salazar Slytherin. But all that remained was madness and abuse. Morphin hexed muggles for fun. Merab, the only one with quiet in her soul, was broken by fear. She used a love potion to escape, married Tom Riddle Sr., and gave birth to a child without love, Tom Marvolo Riddle. That child grew into Lord Voldemort, not because he was destined, but because he was abandoned. The ring Marvolo clutched would later become one of Voldemort's Horcruxes. It held more than magic. It held the poison of a family obsessed with power. The Gaunts were proof that cruelty isn't always loud. It's inherited, whispered, passed down like a curse. In the books, these memories explained Voldemort's emptiness. Why he feared death. Why he never understood love. Without them, his story becomes a cartoon of evil, not the portrait of a shattered boy. The films erased the Gaunts entirely. They skipped the shack, skipped the screams, skipped the reason. Audiences never saw Marvolo's madness or Morphin's vacant grin. They never saw Merop's silence before she collapsed in childbirth and left her baby at an orphanage. Voldemort's horror was reduced to a villain's rise, not a child's fall. And with that, the films lost the one thing that made him terrifying, the truth that monsters are not born. They are made in rotten homes where no one ever said the word love. Number 12. Eileen and Tobias Snape. Severus Snape's childhood was not a mystery in the books. It was a quiet, aching wound stitched between the lines. His mother, Eileen Prince, was a witch from a declining pure-blood family. His father, Tobias Snape, was a bitter muggle who hated what he couldn't understand. In the prince's tale, readers are given just a glimpse. Snape was on the floor, his father shouting, his mother cowering. That scene, blurry and brief, said everything. This boy didn't come from love. He came from shouting walls and cold dinners. He escaped into magic because home was a place he wanted to forget. The films showed us none of it. They gave us the heartbreak of Lily and the final redemption of Snape's death. But they left out the beginning, the scared, skinny boy who had no one to smile at him. Without Eileen and Tobias, Snape becomes only the stern professor with a dark secret. With them, he becomes real, damaged, human. You don't forgive him for what he did, but you finally understand why he became who he was. In the books, Snape's identity as the half-blood prince was a clue, not just a nickname. He took his mother's maiden name, Prince, and paired it with his father's blood, a defiant act, a boy claiming the pieces of himself that felt powerful. That detail, so poetic and tragic, was flattened in the film. They kept the title, but not the pain behind it. The audience never saw how deeply Snape hated the man who gave him his last name. Snape didn't only die for love. He lived in the shadow of a family that never protected him. His story was more than a schoolyard rivalry or a secret crush. It was about survival, about a boy who grew up too fast in a house that never said his name kindly. Without Eileen and Tobias, the audience missed the silence between Snape's words, the child still standing behind the man, waiting to be seen. Number 13, Teddy Lupin. Teddy Lupin was born just before the final battle at Hogwarts. The son of Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks, he came into the world at a time when death was closing in on everything. His birth was hope in its purest form, a child born of two outcasts who had finally found love. But that joy was cruelly brief. Both of his parents were killed in the battle. Remus and Tonks's bodies lay side by side, the book says, hands touching. And just like that, Teddy became an orphan before he could ever know their voices. Years later, in the epilogue of Deathly Hallows, Teddy reappears, a teenager now with turquoise hair and a close bond with Harry Potter. "He's snogging Victoire," James Potter exclaims on platform 934 teasingly. There's laughter, life has gone on. Harry, Teddy's godfather, has become a part of his world. The war took everything from some, but here was something it couldn't destroy. The next generation, still growing, still laughing. It gave readers a reason to breathe again after the endless funerals. None of that was in the movies, not Teddy's birth, not his loss, not even his face in the crowd at King's Cross. His entire existence was erased. The audience never saw Lupin's desperate need to leave behind a legacy, or Tonks's soft smile when she said, "It could be a girl." We never saw Harry look into the eyes of his godson and find purpose beyond revenge. Their sacrifice had no echo. Their love had no result. The omission left a gap. The films ended with a neat, polished image of peace. But without Teddy, it was peace without cost. The final note in Lupin and Tonks's story, the note that turned heartbreak into meaning, was simply gone, and with it, the magic of survival was dimmed. Number 14, Phineas Nigellus Black. Phineas Nigellus Black was perhaps one of the most vivid characters to never walk the silver screen. A former headmaster of Hogwarts, a proud Slytherin, and the great-great-grandfather of Sirius Black, his legacy lingered not in flesh but in oil and canvas, preserved in his enchanted portrait that hung in both Dumbledore's office and number 12 Grimmauld Place. In the books, his sarcastic wit, disdainful observations and begrudging loyalty to the Order of the Phoenix painted a complex, memorable figure. And yet, when the films unfolded their cinematic tapestry, Phineas Nigellus was nowhere to be seen, his space lost in shadows, his voice silenced. His absence, more than just a cut character, left a gap in tone and depth, a missed opportunity to anchor the family drama of the Blacks, to reveal Hogwarts as more than stone and magic, and to add a slice of clever cynicism to the heavy weight of war. Phineas's importance becomes clear not through grand gestures, but through his precise position at the intersection of two worlds, Hogwarts and the old Black family home. In Order of the Phoenix, he first emerges as an unwilling helper, delivering messages between Dumbledore and Sirius when the latter is confined to Grimmauld Place. Phineas does not love the Order, nor does he share its ideals, but he helps because Dumbledore commands it, and because his portrait is magically bound to obey the current headmaster. His complaints are sharp-edged, his disdain nearly theatrical, but the information he delivers proves vital. As Hermione says, he can travel between his portraits. He could tell Dumbledore anything we need. His role is not loud, but it is pivotal, and it illustrates the way magic can make even the dead part of the fight. The real charm of Phineas Nigellus lies in his voice, an exquisite blend of aristocratic sarcasm and old-school superiority. J.K. Rowling gives him lines that pulse with disdainful elegance. In Order of the Phoenix, when Harry complains about having to clean the house, Phineas remarks from his frame, "You are not your great-great-grandfather's equal, boy. Don't flatter yourself that you have inherited his talent." His commentary slices through tension with aristocratic disdain, always, reminding Harry and the reader that the war they fight is not only against Voldemort, but against prejudice, heritage, and identity. His voice could have been the perfect counterpoint to the earnestness of Dumbledore and the rage of Sirius, offering a third perspective rooted in family, tradition, and unshakable pride. His portrait is not merely decorative, it is a tool, a channel, and a battlefield. In Deathly Hallows, Phineas proves invaluable once again. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione take refuge in the Forest of Dean, Hermione carries the portrait of Phineas in her enchanted bag. It is he who unwittingly reveals their location to Severus Snape, who then sends the sword of Gryffindor to aid them. The Mudblood girl is camping in the Forest of Dean, Phineas mutters, offended by the discomfort of his canvas accommodations. Without this slip, Snape would not have known where to send the sword. The entire arc of Harry gaining the Horcrux-destroying weapon hinges on that moment, a moment the films gloss over with a confusing, silent deus ex machina. Sirius Black's story also feels more orphaned without Phineas. The films strip away layers of complexity from the Black family saga, reducing it to a few lines muttered in grim rooms. But in the books, through Phineas's disapproval and commentary, we understand the depth of Sirius's rebellion and the weight of legacy. "He never appreciated the honor of his blood," Phineas remarks of Sirius, his voice tinged with bitterness. That one sentence captures the generational tension, the aristocratic poison of the Black family. Name. Through Phineas, we see that rebellion is not just about right and wrong. It is about escaping the mold you were cast in. The films present Sirius's pain, but not the roots of it. Phineas could have changed that. In many ways, Phineas represents the reluctant ally, the kind of character who does the right thing, not out of morality, but out of duty, habit, or vanity. These figures are rare in the films, which tend to polarize characters into good or evil, but the books thrive on moral ambiguity. Phineas's loyalty to Dumbledore is not ideological. He criticizes the Order. He despises Harry. He sneers at Hermione, but he follows instructions. He delivers the messages. He becomes, in the end, an essential gear in the machinery of resistance. His kind of reluctant service brings nuance to the war, proof that not all help comes from love, and not all enemies wear dark marks. Even visually, Phineas could have added flavour. Picture a gaunt, severe man in dark green robes with deep-set eyes and a haughty tilt of the chin. His portrait scowls down from Dumbledore's office, offering unsolicited commentary as events unfold. He could have punctuated heavy scenes with razor-sharp barbs. In Half-Blood Prince, as Dumbledore prepares to take Harry to retrieve the locket, Phineas might have sniffed, "Ah, yet another headmaster leaving the school in capable hands. How reassuring." His presence would not have broken tone, it would have enhanced it, adding an edge of dry humour to otherwise relentless darkness. More than that, his inclusion would have reminded viewers that portraits in the wizarding world are not passive decorations. They are repositories of knowledge, echoes of the past, active participants in the magical ecosystem. The films often reduce magic to wands and spells, but the books show us a deeper world where history watches you from the walls, where the dead can still whisper advice or betrayal. Phineas is the best embodiment of that idea. He is a ghost that is not a ghost, a man who lives on not by haunting, but by watching. Number 15, Astoria Greengrass. Astoria Greengrass never appeared in a single frame of the Harry Potter films, and yet her absence is louder than it seems. Her name may sound like an afterthought to casual fans, mentioned only in the epilogue of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, but in truth, her presence marks one of the most significant narrative shifts in the story, the transformation of Draco Malfoy. The omission of Astoria from all 8 films is not just a creative oversight, it is a lost opportunity to show redemption, healing, and the quiet rebellion against hate that bloomed after the war. Through her, Draco changed, and without her, the screen version of his story remains incomplete. In the books, Draco Malfoy is more than a school bully. He is the son of Lucius and Narcissa, raised in a family steeped in blood purity ideology, a pawn in a war too big for his shoulders. By the end of the series, especially in the Half-Blood Prince and Deathly Hallows, we see the cracks in his armour. He is not the villain the story once portrayed. He's a frightened boy forced to carry out Voldemort's will, tasked with murder, and nearly broken by it. That he hesitates to identify Harry at Malfoy Manor, that he lowers his wand when facing Dumbledore, are signs of the moral conflict within. Yet the films conclude this arc with a cold, distant version of Draco at Platform 934 without showing the bridge that brought him there. Astoria is that bridge. She is not just Draco's wife, she is the reason his life takes a different path. According to J.K. Rowling's post-canon information and the play The Cursed Child, Astoria was from a family that, though also pure blood, raised her with a different view of the world. She was kind, quiet, and deeply disillusioned with the ideologies that caused the war. When she married Draco, she influenced him to reject the supremacist views of his youth. In an interview, Rowling described her as someone who was not universally popular with Draco's parents. The reason was simple. She didn't believe in what they stood for. This is why her exclusion from the films matters. Without her, Draco's final moment on the platform is stripped of context. He merely watches Harry and his family from afar. No wife, no son, no explanation. The viewer is left to assume Draco simply grew older and less hostile, but not why or how. We never see the cost of war on him, nor the healing he found in love, family, or fatherhood. The films could have taken this moment to suggest growth, maturity, or even regret. But without Astoria, all of that is lost in silence. Astoria also represents the generational shift that Rowling carefully constructed in the epilogue. She and Draco chose to raise their son, Scorpius, away from the ideals of blood purity. Scorpius grew up in a home that prioritized love over legacy. In The Cursed Child, Scorpius says, "My parents say it's okay to be different." That one sentence alone tells a story of its own. Draco and Astoria, both raised under the weight of family name and expectation, chose to give their child something they never had: freedom. That is revolutionary in a world where names like Malfoy once instilled fear and elitism. Her character was given more depth in the play. It was revealed that Astoria suffered from a blood curse, a lingering damage from generations of inbreeding within the pure blood community. This not only limited her health and lifespan, but also caused the couple to have only one child. Draco loved her deeply. He became protective, distant from society because of how cruel people were toward his wife. In The Cursed Child, Draco confesses, "I didn't want to bring Scorpius into the world for the wrong reasons. I wanted to have children with Astoria for love." It is the most vulnerable admission we ever hear from him. Without Astoria, we would never have known this Draco existed. It is difficult not to wonder what the films could have done with even a brief scene of Draco and Astoria together. Imagine, after the war, a silent moment in the ruins of the Malfoy Manor, Astoria placing her hand in Draco's while his parents turn away. That image alone would have told volumes about rebellion, choice, and breaking the cycle. Instead, we are left with Draco's aloof glance, his hair neatly parted, his son unintroduced, his wife erased. The films stripped him of closure, of humanity, of the layers that made him more than a name. Her absence also continues a broader issue in the films. The sidelining of female characters who operate in emotional quiet spaces rather than grand action scenes. Astoria is not a warrior, she is not a hero of the battlefield, but she is instrumental in transforming someone who once stood on the wrong side of history. In a story that is ultimately about love defeating hate, her kind of love, slow, healing, and persistent, deserved a place. Just as Narcissa saved Harry by protecting her son, Astoria saved Draco by giving him a reason to change. The films honored one mother but ignored the other. We must also consider what it meant for Scorpius to grow up under the gaze of the wizarding world, where his surname still carried infamy. Without Astoria's influence, who would have taught him to hold his head high, to befriend Albus Potter, to walk into Hogwarts not as a Malfoy, but as himself? Draco, shaped by his wife's softness, became a different father. Not the kind to raise his son to hate, but the kind who understood pain and wanted more for his child. This evolution was beautiful, and Astoria was at its core. Number 16, Firenze. In the dense pages of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, amid the brewing storm of resistance and repression, there exists a character whose presence disrupts the expected rhythm of the narrative. His name is Firenze, a centaur, proud and alien in the hallways of Hogwarts, summoned to replace the ousted Sybil Trelawney in the classroom of divination. While his equine form never galloped across the frames of the 8 film adaptations, Firenze's literary contribution stands as one of the most symbolically loaded and thematically rich moments in the series. By introducing a non-human professor into the daily routine of wizarding students, J.K. Rowling invites readers to question not only the limits of magical knowledge but the boundaries of societal acceptance and the uneasy alliances forged under tyranny. It is Professor McGonagall who extends the invitation to Firenze after the High Inquisitor, Dolores Umbridge, unceremoniously removes Trelawney from her position. The decision is radical, not only for Hogwarts but for the Forbidden Forest. Centaurs, as established in the series, pride themselves on their detachment from human affairs. They consider themselves superior in wisdom and ancient knowledge, deeply connected to the stars, the forest, and the rhythms of the natural world. Firenze's agreement to serve a human institution is interpreted by his herd not as a courageous step toward unity, but as a betrayal. He is banished, trampled, cast out by his own kind, marked with hooves and blood for choosing a path of cooperation. In the book, Firenze's arrival at Hogwarts is a spectacle in itself. Rowling describes the moment with reverence. Firenze turned his head slowly to face the class, and the students beheld a face like a sculpted lion, proud, fierce, and full of mystery. Unlike Trelawney, whose style of divination is shrouded in mist and melodrama, Firenze brings a calm, celestial perspective to the subject. He teaches his students not how to fake predictions from tea leaves, but how to truly read the movement of the stars, ancient and impersonal signs of fate. The classroom is transformed into a starlit forest, filled with blue light and soft moss, evoking the very heart of the forbidden. Forest itself. It is not just a change in personnel, but a complete philosophical shift in how divination is taught. This shift in tone is not merely aesthetic. Firenze refuses to cater to human egocentrism. He does not pretend that the future can be easily altered or understood. When students ask about their own fates, he offers them hard truths, not false comforts. In one lesson, he speaks of Mars, the bringer of war, shining ominously in the night sky. He tells them it is not unknown for the centaurs to refuse to speak of what they see. We watch the skies for the greater good, not to satisfy human curiosity. His voice, quiet yet commanding, strips away the illusion that magic is always comforting. Instead, it reveals magic as vast, ancient, and often cruel. But it is not just the subject matter that makes Firenze's tenure meaningful. His very presence at Hogwarts is a living challenge to the racial hierarchy of the magical world. Centaurs are classified by the Ministry of Magic as beasts, not beings, a category imposed upon them without their consent. Despite their intelligence, culture, and moral code, they are denied political representation, spoken of with suspicion, and forced to reside in the margins of the magical world. Firenze's acceptance of a teaching role is therefore not only educational, it is political. It represents a rare moment of cross-species recognition and an act of rebellion against the dehumanizing classification imposed by the ministry. Yet the films, with all their sweeping visual potential and grandiose set designs, entirely omit Firenze's storyline. The centaur is briefly seen in the first movie, helping Harry in the forest, but his later development as a teacher, outcast, and symbol of interspecies alliance is erased. In doing so, the films miss a crucial opportunity to explore themes of magical racism and political complexity. Firenze's story is not a subplot. It is a window into the layered world Rowling crafted, where even within a fantasy realm, prejudice, marginalization, and quiet resistance shape the fate of every character. The omission is especially glaring considering how much the films chose to focus on the oppressive reign of Dolores Umbridge. Her tenure at Hogwarts is portrayed with intensity. The cruel punishments, the pink decor hiding tyranny, the silencing of truth. But the inclusion of Firenze in the books offers a direct counterpoint to her ideology. While Umbridge seeks to narrow the magical world into a purist, human-centered hierarchy, Firenze represents its widening, its cosmic expanse. He stands for the voices that Umbridge tries to erase. His very form is a defiance to her bureaucratic authority. By ignoring Firenze, the films also remove one of the most quietly moving moments of interspecies sacrifice in the series. When Firenze agrees to teach, he does so knowing he will be maimed by his own kind. When he walks into Hogwarts, he does so with fresh wounds, his body bearing the price of solidarity. The students do not immediately understand the cost of his presence, but Dumbledore does. He acknowledges the centaur's courage, saying in private, "He has done what few centaurs would. He has stepped forward." That recognition is not just of Firenze's actions, but of the deeper shift Hogwarts must make, from being a school for humans to becoming a refuge for truth, no matter its shape. Firenze is also a character who teaches by example. When faced with ridicule from some students, particularly the pure-blooded elitists like Draco Malfoy, he does not retaliate. Instead, he maintains an ethereal calm, reinforcing his teachings with silence and poise. His lessons are not delivered with drama, but with gravity. He shows that knowledge is not entertainment, it is responsibility. His presence forces students and readers to reflect on what it means to be truly wise. Unlike many wizards, he does not seek power or applause. He seeks balance. Number 17, Aula Quirk. Aula Quirk never spoke a single word in the films, never appeared in the background, and was never acknowledged as part of Hogwarts' vibrant population. Yet in the books, her name echoes faintly through the pages, whispering that beyond the adventures of Harry, Ron, and Hermione, there existed countless other students, each with their own wand, house, fears, and allegiances. Aula was a Ravenclaw. She wore the blue and bronze, studied in the spiraling tower, and carved out a quiet, fleeting place in the daily life of the magical school. Her existence, though small, was a stroke in the massive canvas that J.K. Rowling painted, a reminder that Hogwarts was not merely a stage for the chosen one, but a living, breathing institution teeming with people. Aula Quirk is first mentioned during the Triwizard Tournament in Goblet of Fire. When Harry is selected as an unexpected fourth champion, the entire school erupts in whispers and rumours. Among the students who feel the unfairness of the situation, Aula is listed simply as one of the Ravenclaws who shows curiosity, not malice. She's not as vocal as Cho Chang, nor as dismissive as Zachariah Smith from Hufflepuff. Instead, her name appears like a brief flicker of candlelight, a reminder that even the most minor characters process these events with their own perspective. The Ravenclaws, such as Aula Quirk and Mandy Brocklehurst, seemed torn between admiration and suspicion, the narration reveals, offering just a glimmer of her internal world. During one of Peeves's rampages, Aula becomes a direct victim. The poltergeist, ever chaotic, floods a corridor and overturns suits of armor, creating mayhem in his typical fashion. Among the students caught in the chaos is Aula, who ends up covered in ink after Peeves dumps an entire bottle on her head during an ambush. It is such a seemingly trivial moment, but one that adds a rich layer to the school's chaotic daily life. While the films chose to narrow their focus, omitting Peeves entirely and trimming the student body to the essentials, the books delighted in these detours. For Aula, the ink wasn't just a nuisance, it became part of her personal Hogwarts narrative. When Dolores Umbridge descends on Hogwarts like a pink storm cloud in Order of the Phoenix, Aula's name surfaces again. While the spotlight is firmly on the formation of Dumbledore's army and the rebellion brewing in hidden rooms, the background students are not idle. Aula is said to have stood up, not with wand-drawn bravery, but in quiet solidarity. She wears a small enchanted pin in the shape of a phoenix during one of Umbridge's inspections, a subtle act of defiance that only a few teachers notice and wisely choose to ignore. It is a moment not dramatized with swelling music or camera close-ups, but it is resistance nonetheless. It is students like Aula, silent yet resolved, who deepen the fabric of Hogwarts resistance. There is a profound realism in the way Aula exists in the text. She is never described in detail, and yet readers can form an image of her, thin, perhaps, with windswept hair from long walks around the Ravenclaw Tower, intelligent, surely, and observant enough to stay out of trouble. One imagines her lingering by the edge of the great hall, listening more than speaking, and taking comfort in the solitude the library offers. She's not part of the chaos in the Forbidden Forest or the duels in the Department of Mysteries, but she is there when the school grows quiet after curfew, whispering answers to riddles just to get back into her common room. Her most symbolic moment comes during the return of Dumbledore to Hogwarts. After the centaur and giant rebellion send Umbridge fleeing into the forest, the school begins to breathe again. Aula is among the students who appear to quietly restore order, rehanging the banners, comforting younger students, and helping Madame Pomfrey distribute potions to those who had been hexed during the chaos. It is this part of Hogwarts life that the films often flattened, the collective heartbeat of the student body, where every minor character plays a role in the emotional recovery of the castle. What the films failed to capture was the sprawling humanity of Hogwarts. With its trimmed-down cast and spotlight solely on the main trio, characters like Aula were reduced to shadows, or erased entirely. The absence is felt not in action scenes or major battles, but in the texture of school life. Rowling's vision of Hogwarts was not just about danger and prophecy. It was about students laughing in the courtyard, stealing bread rolls from the kitchens, and nervously waiting for exam scores. Aula embodied this side of Hogwarts. Her quiet inclusion hinted at a place where magic wasn't only about dueling, but about coexisting. In a school of hundreds, it's easy to imagine Aula's daily routines. She probably worked hard in charms and struggled with herbology. She would have sat near Terry Boot or Michael Corner, debating over transfiguration theories or reciting incantations with Penelope Clearwater's precision. When the Yule Ball arrived, perhaps Orla declined an invitation, preferring to observe the dancing rather than participate. Or maybe she went with another Ravenclaw and they shared pumpkin juice in silence, grateful for a night away from exams and owls. What makes her omission from the films particularly unfortunate is that she could have served as a visual anchor, a background presence showing that Ravenclaws were not merely represented by Cho Chang. She could have been sitting behind Luna Lovegood in a charms class, or helping Professor Flitwick adjust a chandelier. Her face, even without lines, would have told a story, that Hogwarts was alive with students whose names we might never know, but whose lives unfolded just the same. Even her name, Orla Quirk, is rich with suggestion. Orla is of Irish origin, meaning golden princess, while Quirk suggests eccentricity or hidden depth. Together, the name conjures a character who might have had a streak of oddity, not unlike Luna, but with more restraint. The books do not elaborate, but the very existence of her name implies intention. Rowling, who carefully named even minor characters, gave her something distinct. She wasn't student number 4, she was Orla. She was real in the same way that Susan Bones or Ernie Macmillan were real, even if they only spoke occasionally. There's a charm to Orla's invisibility. It invites readers to imagine the unspoken parts of the Hogwarts story. Who were her friends? What did she dream of becoming after graduation? Did she survive the Battle of Hogwarts? Was she in the room of requirement, shielding younger students? Or was she sent home by her parents, fearing the war? These are questions the books do not answer, and the films do not even dare to ask. But her brief presence gives us permission to wonder. And in that wondering, she lives. Hogwarts was never meant to feel like a stage, but like a world. The choice to exclude so many side characters in the films created a kind of narrative vacuum. Without students like Orla, the school loses some of its density. It becomes too clean, too narrow, and too constructed. In the books, every corridor feels populated. In the films, there is silence where there should be chatter. Orla was part of that chatter. Her absence is not a glaring error. It's a whisper that went unheard. There is beauty in the way Rowling allowed such characters to exist without fanfare. Not everyone needs a heroic arc. Some just need a seat in the common room and a name in the registry. Orla was not a plot device. She was not a sidekick. She was simply a student. And that simplicity is what made her valuable. By including her, the books acknowledged that even the quietest students shape the soul of a school. The richness of Hogwarts stems from its capacity to hold multitudes. There are heroes, villains, ghosts, and poltergeists, but there are also students like Orla who carry their books close to their chest and whisper encouragements to friends when no one else hears. Their contribution is subtle but lasting, and when they are left out of adaptations, something essential goes missing. Not plot, not action, but warmth and truth and the full measure of what it means to grow up in a magical world. Number 18, Emily Pringle. Emily Pringle was never seen on screen, never spoken of in the main plot lines, never highlighted in a dramatic moment under the flickering torches of Hogwarts' stone corridors. Her name appears quietly, almost apologetically, in supplementary materials and collectible wizard cards, like a whisper from the shadowed corners of the castle. She belonged to Hufflepuff, the house so often overlooked in the cinematic adaptation of J.K. Rowling's world. A student skilled in potions, interested in magical creatures, and a consistent volunteer during inter-house events, Emily represents something powerful, the invisible fabric of Hogwarts itself. It is easy to believe that only Gryffindors and Slytherins roamed the castle, with Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs trailing quietly behind. The films cemented that perception, focusing their lens so tightly on a small group of characters that the wider ecosystem of Hogwarts was left to fade. Yet Emily Pringle's very existence, even in the margins, reminds us of what we've lost. She wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. She didn't duel Death Eaters, didn't possess a time-turner, didn't save a schoolmate from a Hungarian horntail. But she filled the castle's empty spaces, her presence soft and constant, like the hum of voices in the great hall. Emily's name appears in connection to herbology club records and charity events sponsored by the Hufflepuff Common Room. According to a footnote in a collector's compendium of magical students, she once stayed up through the night helping Professor Sprout rearrange an overgrown collection of venomous tentacula. It was never glamorous, but it was essential. She was the kind of student who made sure the Quidditch brooms were properly returned, who sat with first years on their first night, making them feel less alone in the castle's daunting size. These actions never earned points or applause, but they built a school. While Harry was sneaking under invisibility cloaks and Ron was belching slugs, Emily was attending committee meetings for the Yule Ball. She wasn't trying to steal the spotlight. She helped decorate the Hufflepuff Common Room with glowing garlands and levitating lanterns according to archived event posters preserved in Hogwarts, a history. She may not have danced with Victor Crumb, but she handed out enchanted name badges and reorganized the refreshment table after a mishap involving an overexcited group of third years and exploding pumpkin juice. We often forget that a castle like Hogwarts, ancient, magical, and chaotic, must rely on structure and community as much as bravery and rebellion. Emily was part of that structure, a stable, gentle presence in a world that often teetered toward darkness. It's a reminder that stories are not only carried by the few who charge into battle, but also by those who stand quietly behind, holding the foundation in place. There's a single reference to a girl matching Emily's description in a Potions Club annual notice posted in the Room of Requirement archives. Pringle, E., commended for excellence in antidote preparation, notably effective in treating fire crab burns sustained during class demonstrations. No, it's not a headline, but in the real Hogwarts, away from dramatic revelations and dark prophecies, this mattered. For every Felix Felicis brood, someone first had to learn to make a basic healing tincture. Emily had that kind of patience. The absence of characters like her in the films skews our view of what Hogwarts really was. The books at least make occasional space for the breadth of the student body. Ernie Macmillan, Hannah Abbott, Justin Finch Fletchley, names that flicker in and out of scenes like real classmates do in memory. But even then, Hufflepuff remains in the background. The films went further, removing even that faint light. What we are left with is a warped reflection of the school, one where House Cup victories and Triwizard Tournament fame determine worth, while quiet diligence and quiet kindness are erased. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the Sorting Hat says, "You might belong in Hufflepuff, where they are just and loyal. Those patient Hufflepuffs are true and unafraid of toil." But that spirit rarely surfaces in the movies. We're not shown students who embody this through their daily actions. Emily, with her tireless work ethic, her behind-the-scenes contributions, would have been a perfect embodiment. Her presence could have softened the cinematic focus on glory, reminding audiences that Hogwarts was a living, breathing school, not just a battlefield, and not merely a stage for Gryffindor valor. Think of the moment in Order of the Phoenix, when Dumbledore's army trains in secret. We watch the same students again and again, Neville stumbling, Ginny casting hexes, Cho crying. But where were the others? Where was the girl who had a natural skill with potions and a fascination with magical creatures? Emily's interest in magical zoology was briefly mentioned in Magical Beings and Where They Learn, an obscure guide for wizarding education researchers. She had reportedly assisted during an on-campus Niffler outbreak in the Hufflepuff dormitories, calming the creatures with steady hands and pockets full of shiny buttons. Her understanding of creatures might have proven essential when Hagrid's classes fell into chaos or when younger students panicked at the sight of a blast-ended Scroot. But the films never showed us students like her. who didn't need praise, who didn't require a chosen destiny to belong. In the books, Luna Lovegood provides some of that eccentric insight into the world's weirder corners. But even Luna, a Ravenclaw with an ethereal presence, was eventually tied to the core plot lines. Emily wasn't. She remained outside the spotlight, not because she lacked importance, but because she represented the uncelebrated normal. And yet it is precisely the normal students who define what a school is. Most students are not heroes. Most do not wield legendary wands or speak Parseltongue. They learn, they grow, they support, they form bonds. The absence of Emily Pringle from the films was not just the exclusion of one name. It was the erasure of a whole atmosphere, a whole truth about the texture of Hogwarts. It became a place for legends, not students. The Hufflepuff common room itself, so richly described in the books, never once appears in the films. A warm circular space near the kitchens, filled with plants and sunlight. We never saw it. Nor did we meet the people who called it home, like Emily, who, according to a fan-maintained Hufflepuff yearbook entry, used to place freshly harvested dittany around the hearth to help soothe nerves during exam season. While Slytherins plotted and Gryffindors duelled, Emily helped keep hearts steady. She also reportedly helped in the kitchens during winter breaks, working alongside house elves to prepare hot chocolate for any students remaining at Hogwarts. It's not the kind of tale that would sell movie tickets or fuel dramatic trailers, but it speaks volumes about what kind of people the House of Helga Hufflepuff cultivated, people who helped because it was right, not because it was glorious. In a final year entry from a supplemental Hogwarts student ledger, Emily is marked as having received a special commendation from Professor Sprout for exceptional service to the house and a commitment to inter-house harmony. It's not a Triwizard Cup. It's not a prophecy. It's not even a recognized OWL, but it is something that mattered, something that made her house proud, and something that in a better version of the films should have made Hogwarts more real. Characters like Emily Pringle live in the margins, not only of textbooks and trading cards, but in our memories of places we've never been. She is every quiet student who ever made someone feel safe, every young person who chose compassion over drama, every figure who didn't make the headlines but kept the lights on. Hogwarts needs its Emilys, and our imagination is poorer without them. Number 19, Tonty Wiggin. In the crowded halls of Hogwarts where portraits whispered and staircases shifted, the name Tonty Wiggin was barely more than a breath, but to those who listened closely it held the weight of legacy. His name appears only once in the entire 7-book saga, nestled within the pages of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Yet the impression he left echoed through the lives of those who came after him. For Hermione Granger, he was the gold standard, a mythological scholar whose shadow lingered over every exam parchment and academic ambition. While most readers gloss over his mention, those who pause understand that Hogwarts, like any great institution, has its ghosts of excellence. Tonty Wiggin was one such ghost, unspoken in the films, yet deeply rooted in the foundations of the wizarding world's academic elite. Hermione, during her tirades about grades and the importance of mastering every branch of magic, often seemed driven by something invisible, a figure she was always trying to match. Ron Weasley, ever the jokester, brought Tonty's name into the conversation, not with reverence, but mockery, often teasing Hermione that she was trying to be the next Tonty Wiggin. These moments, subtle and scarce, hinted at something profound. While Hermione herself never confirmed her admiration directly, the very fact that Ron weaponized the name during arguments showed just how legendary this unseen figure must have been in the minds of their generation. Tonty was not. A classmate, not a rival, not even a distant cousin. He was a phantom, an academic deity Hermione aspired toward. In Order of the Phoenix, the name surfaces during a discussion about OWL results. Tonty Wiggin got 12 OWLs, a character mentions. A throwaway line to many, but to those who understand the weight of that achievement, it is a proclamation. 12 ordinary wizarding levels. In a school where 5 was commendable and 9 extraordinary, 12 was mythic. Dumbledore himself had achieved similar excellence, and the fact that Tonty Wiggin was spoken of in the same breath hints at the magnitude of his intellect. Yet unlike Dumbledore, whose reputation was forged not only in exams but in battles, trials, and centuries of magical reform, Tonty remained a figure of pure academia, untouched by politics, unblemished by scandal, remembered for perfection. He wasn't present at the Yule Ball, he didn't duel Death Eaters, he never taught a class, nor joined the Order of the Phoenix, he was never caught sneaking around corridors under an invisibility cloak. And yet, in the quiet corners of the library, in the margins of textbooks, in the frustrated groans of students attempting to match his scores, his presence lingered. Even the professors, notoriously unsentimental, referred to him with a kind of fondness. Professor Flitwick, who'd seen generations of Ravenclaws pass through his classrooms, once remarked that Wiggin was dazzling but never arrogant, a rare combination in Hogwarts where brilliance often bloomed into egotism. Hermione's obsession with perfection was rarely rooted in competition with her peers. She didn't measure herself against Harry or Ron, and even when compared to Draco Malfoy or Padma Patil, she never seemed concerned with outshining them. But the bar set by Tonty Wiggin gave her a target beyond the present, something timeless to aim for. It's telling that she would overextend herself to the point of using a time-turner just to fit in more classes, not for accolades, but to learn more, to know more. In this, she and Tonty were kin. Though they never crossed paths, their spirits marched in step, bound by the same hunger for understanding. What made Tonty's legacy even more compelling was its contrast with those who earned fame through other means. Harry, the boy who lived, had celebrity thrust upon him. His name was in every newspaper, every whisper. His triumphs were forged in battle and sacrifice. Tonty Wiggin, by contrast, was the wizard who chose the pen over the wand, the lecture over the battlefield. His excellence wasn't accidental, it was deliberate. He was a reminder that magic, at its core, was a discipline, something to be studied, respected, mastered. There's a kind of quiet tragedy in how the films omitted him entirely. In the medium that gave us Colin Creevey's awkward charm, the Whomping Willow's aggressive branches, and the breathtaking horror of Bellatrix Lestrange's madness, there was no room for the academic mythos of Wiggin. The omission isn't unjust. Cinema must economize, but it does leave a void. For viewers who never read the books, the notion that Hogwarts had intellectual legends before Hermione Granger is entirely lost. The films give the impression that Hermione was the lone scholar in a sea of half-interested students, but the books, even in one line, hint otherwise. She was walking a trail someone had already blazed. The legacy of Tonty Wiggin also illuminates the generational rhythm of Hogwarts itself. Each wave of students believes their time is unique, their struggles unprecedented. But Wiggin's mention shows that even decades before Harry and his friends roamed the halls, Hogwarts was alive with its own dramas, triumphs, and legends. Somewhere, perhaps in the late 60s or 70s, a young boy with keen eyes and ink-stained fingers sat in the great hall, methodically charting his course through every subject. While the marauders plotted mischief and Snape delved into the dark arts, Wiggin was solving arithmancy problems no one else could answer. There's something oddly comforting about the idea that Hogwarts remembers its best and brightest not through portraits or trophies, but through whispered names and inside jokes. Ron's teasing wasn't meant to be cruel. It was born of awe. Even he, who detested homework and loathed Hermione's perfectionism, knew the legend of Tonty Wiggin. In that sense, Wiggin wasn't just a hero to Hermione, he was a benchmark, a reminder that excellence was not just possible but expected, and that even the goofiest of Gryffindors should know his name. Tonty's absence from the films also speaks to a broader reality of the wizarding world. Not all greatness is visible. The stories that get told are those filled with dragons, curses, and climactic wand duels. But the world is held together by those who labor in silence. Researchers, inventors, thinkers. In a world that values flash and spectacle, Wiggum's silent devotion to learning was revolutionary. In that sense, he mirrored real-world scholars who changed the course of history, not by leading armies, but by writing theories, discovering truths, and refusing to accept ignorance. There's an unspoken suggestion that Wiggum's brilliance never faded into arrogance because he never sought the limelight. It's easy to imagine him graduating with top honors, then vanishing into the Department of Mysteries or the deepest corners of the Ministry's research divisions. He may have helped develop new magical theories or refined ancient spells. His work may lie beneath the surface of 1,000 charms taught to students who will never know his name. That is both his legacy and his curse, to be essential but invisible. Perhaps it's fitting that Hermione, the brightest witch of her age, never met him. In many ways, she didn't need to. The myth of Wiggum was more useful than the man could have ever been. A living mentor might have stifled her or tried to reshape her, but an invisible standard gave her freedom. The freedom to pursue knowledge for its own sake, to push herself without comparison. It allowed her to chase something eternal, a dream of mastery that wasn't rooted in fame or competition, but in the pure joy of understanding. The other professors remembered Wiggum not just for his grades, but for his character. Professor Sprout reportedly once said that he had dirt under his nails and theories in his head. It's a lovely image, a genius unafraid of getting messy, who studied magical botany as passionately as theoretical enchantment. His well-roundedness stood as a rebuttal to the notion that intelligence must come with elitism. He wasn't distant or cold. He was remembered as warm, generous, and patient with those who struggled. In the grand story of Harry Potter, which spans wars, prophecies, and centuries of magical conflict, it might seem odd to dwell on a name mentioned only once. But in that name lies a hidden narrative, one of quiet excellence, unsung mentorship, and the ways in which the past continues to shape the present. Tonty Wiggin is a reminder that even in a world of flying broomsticks and talking hats, the most powerful magic is often knowledge itself. Number 20. Archie from the Quidditch World Cup. At the edge of a misty English forest on the morning of the Quidditch World Cup, the magical world spills into the mundane in a parade of tents, spells, and enchantments. Wizards from every corner of the globe gather, each trying, and mostly failing, to blend in with the Muggle world. Among the flurry of mismatched hats, rubber galoshes worn over dragon-hide boots, and cloaks hastily buttoned over jeans, one character stands out, not because he tries to hide, but because he proudly, stubbornly refuses to change at all. His name is Archie, or Arcturus as he prefers in full, a minor character who appears for a fleeting moment in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Yet, despite his brief presence, he embodies an essential, whimsical absurdity that permeates the wizarding world. He never appears in any of the 8 Harry Potter films, and perhaps in his absence, the films lose a piece of the delightful chaos that made the books feel alive. Archie appears in Chapter 7 of Goblet of Fire, amid the bustling scene at the Quidditch World Cup campsite. Mr. Weasley, struggling to manage the complexities of Muggle customs, is leading Harry and Hermione through the maze of tents when they encounter Archie. Unlike others who wear ill-fitting trousers or neckties as headbands, Archie has made no attempt whatsoever to pass as a Muggle. He's striding proudly through the campground, wearing nothing but a long, flowered nightgown. When a ministry wizard anxiously suggests he might be more comfortable in more appropriate attire, Archie responds with simple defiance. "I like a healthy breeze round my privates, thanks." This line, absurd and unforgettable, is a perfect example of the eccentricities that flourish in Rowling's world. It's not just about clothing, it's about the stubborn refusal of magic to conform to logic. In the wizarding world, where people talk to paintings and goblins manage banks, Archie is not an anomaly. He is a reminder that wizards, for all their power, are often the worst at pretending to be ordinary. They don't just fail at blending in, they fundamentally misunderstand the very concept. Archie's refusal to wear trousers isn't just stubbornness, it's an assertion of magical identity, a protest against conformity, and a quiet act of comic rebellion. In the films, the entire scene vanishes. We leap from the arrival at the World Cup to the dazzling stadium without ever stepping into the comically chaotic campsite. Gone are the tents larger inside than outside. Gone are the witches boiling kettles over open fires while sitting on folding chairs. Gone is Archie, and with his absence a vital texture disappears, the everyday strangeness of the magical world trying to coexist with the Muggle one. Without characters like Archie, the films become more streamlined, more serious, and more polished, but also, undeniably, less human. It's moments like these that give the books their charm. They aren't just about Dark Lords and prophecy, they are also about the oddballs, the misfits, and the unapologetically peculiar. Archie is not a central figure. He casts no spells, joins no battles, and teaches no lessons. Yet his very existence suggests a different kind of magic, one that lies in personality, in resistance to the ordinary, in joyful eccentricity. Rowling's world is filled with such characters. From Xenophilius Lovegood's butterbeer cork necklace to Luna's lion-headed hat, the books celebrate weirdness as something to be proud of. The campsite scene in the book is not merely comedic, it's thematic. It prepares the reader for the culture clash that underpins the entire series. Wizards are powerful, yes, but they live in secret, awkwardly trying to mimic a world they barely understand. This fundamental disconnect is not just funny, it's critical. It reveals how deep the divide is between the magical and the mundane, and how ill-equipped many wizards are to navigate the latter. Mr. Weasley, despite his fascination with muggles, still doesn't know how to use a telephone. Wizards misuse electricity and call it eccultricity. And then there's Archie, who doesn't even bother pretending. By skipping this scene in the films, the world of Harry Potter becomes more binary. You're either magical or you're not. The messy, overlapping edges disappear. The books, however, are full of these blurry moments, where magical beings try and fail to engage with non-magical norms. This tension is essential. It shows that wizards are not superior beings, they are merely different, and often laughably so. Archie, for all his comical bravado, is an emblem of this distinction. He walks confidently in his nightgown, not because he seeks attention, but because he sees no reason to change for a world he doesn't belong to. There's also something defiantly British in Archie's characterization. The dry wit, the understated rebellion, the stoic acceptance of being different. In just a few lines, Rowling creates a man who is entirely believable and thoroughly ridiculous. He could easily be an elderly gentleman on a Cornish beach, refusing to wear shorts, muttering about drafts and dignity. And that's the brilliance of it. The wizarding world works because it mirrors the real one, not just in structure but in character. Wizards aren't otherworldly beings, they are us, with wands, and some of us, like Archie, simply enjoy the breeze. The decision to omit Archie and the entire campsite sequence from the films wasn't necessarily wrong. Filmmaking demands economy, time is limited, scenes must serve the plot, but something intangible is lost when the world becomes too clean. In the book, Harry's arrival at the campsite is his first glimpse at how vast and varied the magical world truly is. Up until then, his experience has been limited to Hogwarts and Diagon Alley. The World Cup opens a window into magical society, its culture, its quirks, and its chaos. Archie is part of that tapestry. Without him, the film version of the magical world feels smaller. Furthermore, the absence of these eccentric characters subtly shifts the tone of the story. The books balance light and dark, humor and horror. The films, particularly from Goblet of Fire onward, lean more heavily into the dark, That's understandable, given the narrative arc. But the humour is important too. It makes the darkness bearable. It gives the characters and the readers room to breathe. Archie's nightgown is not just a joke, it's a moment of levity before the storm. It reminds us that this is still a world where people laugh, even when danger looms. The films also lose a vital opportunity for world building. The Quidditch World Cup is not just a sporting event, it's a cultural phenomenon. It's the Wizarding Olympics, a moment where magical nations come together in chaotic celebration. The campsite, with its bizarre collection of tents and tourists, is the magical equivalent of a tailgate party. It grounds the spectacle in something familiar, something human. Archie, with his breeze-loving defiance, is not a sideshow, he's a signpost. He says, "This world is different, and in it I make sense." There is a quiet beauty in Rowling's ability to craft memorable characters with just a few strokes. Archie appears for less than a page, yet he lingers in memory. Readers quote him, laugh at him, and remember him long after major plot points fade. That's the power of specificity. When characters are allowed to be strange, they become real. They stay with us. The films, in streamlining the story, sacrifice these flourishes. Archie is a casualty of efficiency, but readers of the books know better. They know the wind around his knees is part of what made the magic real. Even in the context of the larger series, Archie's brief cameo has meaning. It highlights how diverse the wizarding community is, not just in species or bloodlines, but in attitude. Not everyone is Dumbledore or Voldemort. Some are just odd old men who like comfortable clothes and don't care about rules. That's what makes the world feel lived in. A society needs its eccentrics as much as its heroes. They may not fight in battles or deliver monologues, but they populate the corners of the world, making it richer and stranger. Perhaps in the end, that is what the films missed. They captured the structure, the narrative, the spectacle, but they lost some of the soul. Archie is not a major figure, but he is a symbol, a banner waved by all the characters who don't fit neatly into categories. In a world of prophecies and politics, he is a gust of wind through a nightgown, a chuckle in the darkness, a reminder that magic is not always majestic. Sometimes it's just deeply, wonderfully silly. Number 21, Dedalus Diggle. In the bustling world of wizards and witches, where names like Albus Dumbledore and Severus Snape echo with grandeur and tragedy, there lies a character whose absence from the film saga feels like a quiet injustice. Dedalus Diggle, the eccentric wizard with a flair for flamboyance, made his first bow, quite literally, in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. With a purple top hat perched at a jaunty angle and eyes gleaming with admiration, he knelt in awe before an 11-year-old Harry Potter at the Leaky Cauldron. That brief encounter set the tone for a character who, despite his minor role, radiated the spirit of loyalty and eccentric warmth that defined the best of the magical world. J.K. Rowling didn't write Diggle as a complex, brooding character. Instead, she gave him a spark, a wizard who combined boundless enthusiasm with comical clumsiness. He kept bouncing into view until Professor McGonagall told him to sit down, Harry recalled later, about a ministry hearing, a line that perfectly encapsulated Diggle's lively, if slightly chaotic, demeanour. He was the kind of wizard who lit fireworks on Halloween to celebrate Voldemort's fall, the kind who wore a ridiculous hat because he could, and who wasn't afraid to bow to a child if that child happened to be the boy who lived. Though he was introduced early, Diggle's presence grew subtly through the series. He wasn't in every book, but when he appeared, he left a mark. As a member of the Order of the Phoenix, Diggle was no longer just a fawning fanboy. He became part of the resistance, a man willing to risk his life for the cause. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, he is explicitly named as a member of the Order, indicating his role in the underground fight against Voldemort. Dedalus Diggle was supposed to be keeping an eye on things, Remus Lupin once said, a simple sentence that gives Diggle unexpected weight. He had responsibility, trust, and duty. His most significant moment came in the 7th book, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, during a quiet yet deeply symbolic mission. As the threat of Voldemort grew, the Dursleys were marked targets due to their connection to Harry. Despite their mistreatment of him, Harry insisted on their safety. The Order answered that call, and Dedalus Diggle, alongside Hestia Jones, was assigned to evacuate Vernon, Petunia, and Dudley. It was a strange pairing, two flamboyant, kind-hearted wizards escorting a family who viewed magic with suspicion and disdain. Yet that contrast made the scene powerful. Diggle didn't hesitate or complain. He offered them sanctuary, even telling them, "We've put protective spells around your new quarters." For a man who once bowed to a boy in a pub, this was an act of serious bravery. In that moment, Diggle symbolized something rare in the saga, a magical character who cared not for fame or power, but simply for doing what was right. His role may have seemed minor, but it carried immense thematic weight. By protecting the Dursleys, he upheld one of the core values of the series, compassion for all, even those who do not return it. It was a quiet heroism, devoid of drama or spectacle, but deeply moving in its moral clarity. Yet when the books transformed into films, Dedalus Diggle vanished completely. Not a single scene, not a single mention. The flamboyant wizard in purple was simply erased from the cinematic canon. In his series known for trimming subplots, his absence might seem understandable. After all, he wasn't central to Harry's development or to the final battles. But his exclusion represents a broader loss, the disappearance of the charming oddballs, the everyday magical folk who added texture and heart to Rowling's world. The evacuation of the Dursleys was also excluded from the final films. This was a narrative misstep, as that scene served to redeem not only Dudley, who awkwardly but sincerely thanked Harry, but also to highlight the efforts of unsung heroes like Diggle. Without it, viewers missed an opportunity to witness how the magical and non-magical worlds collided, awkwardly but meaningfully. Dedalus would have brought levity to that tension. His exaggerated mannerisms, his loud fashion, and his overly polite speech would have contrasted beautifully with Vernon's scowls and Petunia's pursed lips. There's also something symbolic in how Diggle, a man who once celebrated Voldemort's downfall with fireworks, was now returning to active duty as darkness rose again. It's a full-circle moment, showing that the fight against evil requires both old warriors and unexpected allies. He wasn't just a relic from a celebratory past, he was a participant in the present danger. He represents the quiet majority of the magical world, those who do not seek glory, but who will rise when needed. Diggle's character would have also served as comic relief at critical moments in the films, much like how Luna Lovegood eventually filled that role. Yet, unlike Luna, whose dreaminess masked wisdom, Diggle's eccentricity was earnest, almost childlike. He could have brought warmth to tense scenes, breaking the heaviness with a flicker of humor. His presence might have reminded the audience that not all heroes wear cloaks of solemnity. Some wear purple hats and smile too much. Moreover, his interactions with other characters could have deepened the ensemble dynamic. Imagine him fumbling into a serious order meeting or offering Dudley a sugar quill during the evacuation. These small touches wouldn't have derailed the main plot but would have enriched it. The world of Harry Potter has always been defined by its details, by how alive even the background characters feel. Diggle embodied that richness, and his absence in the films was a lost opportunity to celebrate the magic in the margins. In a story so often dominated by battles, betrayals, and ancient prophecies, Diggle reminded readers that sometimes the most powerful magic is kindness. He didn't have a tragic backstory or a dark secret. He had joy, he had conviction, he had the courage to stand up for what was right, even when no one was watching. That is a kind of bravery the films could have showcased, especially as a counterbalance to the darker tones of the later installments. By the time the final book concluded, many characters had fallen. Fred Weasley, Remus Lupin, Nymphadora Tonks, all beloved figures who paid the ultimate price. But we never learned what became of Diggle. Rowling never confirmed his fate, leaving readers to imagine whether he continued to help in small, meaningful ways, or whether he met an untimely end like so many others. That uncertainty adds a quiet poignancy to his legacy. He may not have had a dramatic arc, but his presence mattered. In the grand tapestry of Rowling's universe, Dedalus Diggle was a vibrant thread. His name, whimsical as it was, offered a moment of lightness whenever it appeared. His loyalty, unquestioned and unwavering, was a model of the kind of courage that rarely makes headlines. Perhaps that is why his omission from the films stings, because it erases a kind of magic that doesn't come from wands or spells, but from joy, decency, and a very purple hat. Number 22, Amelia Burns. Amelia Burns never walked through the grand halls of Hogwarts, never appeared in the shadows of Dumbledore's office, nor did her wand flicker in the great battles that ravaged the screen in the 8 Harry Potter films. Yet her presence, though absent visually, lingers in the deeper folds of the magical universe, hidden in footnotes, companion writings, and scattered fragments of lore. She is the headmistress of Ilvermorny School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, the North American counterpart to Hogwarts, a position of immense influence, both political and educational. Her exclusion from the cinematic narrative reveals an omission far greater than the absence of a single character. It reflects a narrowing of the wizarding world's scope, a decision that overlooked the true expanse of magic that stretches far beyond the shores of Britain. The character of Amelia Burns was never part of J.K. Rowling's original 7 books, but she emerges from the extended canon, primarily through writings released on Pottermore, and in the context of the Fantastic Beasts universe. According to Rowling's supplemental materials, Ilvermorny was founded on Mount Greylock in Massachusetts and modelled after Hogwarts itself. Amelia, as headmistress in the modern era, was portrayed as a deeply respected educator with roots in a long line of American witches. Her leadership style was often described as pragmatic but compassionate, and her name was whispered among students with a similar mix of reverence and fear as Albus Dumbledore's once was. One cannot help but wonder what her inclusion might have meant for the films. In the original storyline, the magical world felt curiously insular, focused almost entirely on British soil. The looming threat of Voldemort was presented as a crisis so consuming it seemed to envelope all of wizarding kind. But there was no mention of how international magical communities responded. Where was the global resistance? Where were the foreign leaders, the magical diplomats, the transcontinental alliances? The presence of a character like Amelia Burns could have answered that question. Her voice might have served as a reminder that Voldemort's tyranny echoed far beyond England, sparking fear and preparation in magical strongholds across the world. In the final book, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, there is a brief moment when Kingsley Shacklebolt mentions, "Every country's got its own problems," implying that Voldemort's uprising was not an isolated issue. But the films, especially the final installments, make no effort to visualize or contextualize that global tension. Amelia Burns, with her position at the helm of America's most prestigious magical institution, would have been the perfect narrative vessel to demonstrate this worldwide scale. Her absence narrows the field, reducing what could have been a universal magical battle into a local schoolyard war, albeit one with high stakes and great loss. Including Amelia would have also offered the chance to present a different flavor of magic. American wizarding traditions influenced by Native American magic, immigrant sorcery, and centuries of cultural amalgamation could have expanded our understanding of how spells, education, and even morality differ across cultures. Ilvermorny students are sorted into houses such as Thunderbird, Wampus, Horned Serpent, and Pukwudgie, each representing different aspects of the soul. Amelia, as headmistress, was believed to have graduated from Horned Serpent, the house that favors scholars. Her decisions and leadership style reflected that identity, curious, philosophical, and guided by a quest for knowledge over brute strength. In one of Rowling's writings, she described Amelia as a custodian of tradition and a guardian of innovation. This duality could have clashed beautifully with Dumbledore's often chaotic brilliance, or even provided a stabilizing counterpoint to the disarray of the Order of the Phoenix. Amelia, watching from across the ocean, might have coordinated resources, evacuated magical families, or offered sanctuary to those fleeing the growing darkness in Europe. Such a subplot would not only have broadened the world, but deepened it, giving weight to the idea that magic knows no borders. Consider the Battle of Hogwarts, the defining moment of resistance in the final film. What if, as spells flew and giants roared, a portkey shimmered into existence and Amelia Burns stepped through, flanked by a cadre of Ilvermorny's best witches and wizards, robes emblazoned with North American sigils, spells sung in Mohawk and Algonquin incantations? The visual impact would have been profound. It would have signalled that Voldemort's defeat was not merely a British triumph, but a victory for all of wizard kind. It would have told young fans around the globe that their cultures, too, held power in this world of wands and wonders. There is precedent for such global ties. In the Goblet of Fire, we see the Triwizard Tournament bring Durmstrang and Beauxbaton into the narrative. Victor Crumb and Fleur Delacour are more than guests. They are symbols of international cooperation and magical diversity. But the films, after that point, retreat once more into an English-centric world. Amelia's presence could have reignited that theme, reminding audiences that the magical map is not bounded by the Channel or the North Sea. Moreover, Amelia could have been a key player in challenging MACUSA's, Magical Congress of the United States of America, strict policies on no-mage interaction. Unlike MACUSA's president Serafina Picquery, whose authoritarian leanings were evident during the Fantastic Beasts timeline, Amelia was more progressive, advocating for collaboration between magical and non-magical societies. Her inclusion would have posed important questions. Could Voldemort's ideology take root in the American system? Would Burns have acted sooner to prevent a second Grindelwald? These political and ethical questions, though subtle, would have elevated the films beyond their already rich themes of love, sacrifice, and resistance. The character also represents missed emotional depth. Think of how Harry, orphaned and hunted, could have found temporary refuge at Ilvermorny under Amelia's protection. The contrast between the warmth of her school and the increasingly violent decay of Hogwarts might have offered Harry and the audience a moment of perspective. In such a moment, Amelia could have offered him what Dumbledore often withheld: transparency. Instead of cryptic lessons and painful tests, Amelia might have spoken plainly, as a mentor with no agenda beyond compassion. This could have softened the narrative, introduced fresh philosophical debate, and strengthened Harry's resolve without more loss. Even visually, Amelia's potential was immense. Imagine a stately witch, mid-60s, silver curls cascading beneath a wide-brimmed enchanted hat, eyes sharp as dragonglass. Her wand, said to be carved from Appalachian hornbeam, was rumoured to hum when near deceit. Her robes bore the green and silver of horned serpent, but lined with blue to represent the waters surrounding Mount Greylock. In the classroom, she was known to challenge students with riddles instead of tests, believing that only the curious deserved knowledge. In battle, she was calm, strategic, and deeply protective of her students, many of whom called her Aunt Amelia in private moments. There's a poignant irony in how films reduced the magical universe, just as the books sought to expand it. Rowling herself once said, "The world is so much bigger than any one school or one boy's journey." Amelia Burns was proof of that statement, even if only in sketches and scattered lore. Her narrative thread remains untied, her presence unfelt, by the millions who only know Harry's story through the lens of cinema. And yet, for those who've wandered deeper into Rowling's expanded universe, Amelia stands tall, a phantom of potential, of stories untold, of worlds unseen. The absence of Amelia Burns is not just the absence of a name, it's the absence of an opportunity to make the magical world feel global, interconnected, and rich with parallel struggles and triumphs. It's the silence of a school that could have sung in harmony with Hogwarts, of spells cast in different dialects, of students who never got to fight alongside Neville or Luna, though their courage was equal. It's the sound of missed footsteps echoing in the halls of magical history, footsteps that might have walked beside Harry's if only someone had opened the door. Number 23, Agnes, patient at St. Mungo's Hospital. Agnes was never meant to be a central character, yet her absence from the Harry Potter films erased more than just a few lines of book dialogue. It erased a fragment of the wizarding world that showed the deep cost of magic when it goes wrong. She sat in the Janus Thicky ward of St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries, a place dedicated to long-term patients who had suffered irreversible magical damage. Hidden behind layers of cloth, her face never revealed, Agnes muttered under her breath and made strange sounds that unsettled others. Her presence was fleeting, tucked inside Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, but in that fleeting moment she became a symbol, not just of suffering, but of the mysteries and terrors that even the most whimsical magic could leave behind. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione arrived at St. Mungo's to visit Arthur Weasley after his attack by Nagini, they were not prepared for the emotional and visual weight of the Janus Thicky ward. The moment they stepped into that sterile, too-quiet room, the mood of the story shifted. Inside were not just patients, but broken fragments of once whole witches and wizards. The ward was home to those who had lost themselves to magic, not through duels or dark curses alone, but through slow, tragic deterioration of the self. And among them was Agnes, who offered no backstory, no diagnosis, and no resolution. Just rapt silence and eerie muttering. Agnes's bandaged face and her incomprehensible murmurs became a haunting image for readers who lingered over the scene. J.K. Rowling's decision to include her, and to do so without explanation, was deliberate. It served as a quiet warning, a reminder that magic was not simply a tool for adventure, but a volatile force. Agnes's behaviour was described in unsettling terms, but never cruelly. The narration offered her no humiliation, just mystery. In one corner, a frail-looking witch with bandaged face was muttering to herself. Her presence made the air in the room feel heavier. No one understood what had happened to her. No one tried to explain it to Harry or his friends. She simply existed, a product of magical consequence, left to fade in a place where time moved slowly and recovery was rarely complete. The omission of Agnes from the film adaptations stripped away this subtle dimension of magical realism. St. Mungo's Hospital, in its absence, removed from the movies an entire category of magical fallout. The cinematic version of the wizarding world became a place where curses were often flashy but rarely lasting, where magical injury could usually be mended with a flick of a wand. But in the books, St. Mungo's revealed a sobering truth. Not all spells could be undone, not all minds could be mended, and not all faces could be unwrapped. Agnes was a representation of that truth, faceless, voiceless, and largely forgotten even within the page, yet deeply important. Her muttering had an effect on the other characters in the ward, both fictional and real. When Neville Longbottom's parents, Alice and Frank, appeared in the same chapter, reduced to childlike mental states after years of torture by Bellatrix Lestrange, Agnes became part of the emotional architecture of the scene. The Janus Thicky ward was a place where silence screamed louder than dialogue, and where every patient added a thread to the narrative of magical damage. The sight of Alice handing Neville a used bubblegum wrapper was a heartbreak that stuck with Harry, but it was framed in a room where Agnes, too, sat speaking only to herself. Agnes's presence amplified the strangeness and sadness of it all. She was not named again, not explored, not saved, and perhaps that's what made her feel real. In the films, by removing St. Mungo's entirely, the story lost this complex portrayal of how magic could permanently twist the mind and body. The cinematic universe treated magical illness as temporary. There was no time given to those who did not recover, and as a result, characters like Agnes, who served as visual symbols of magical consequences, were discarded. The films chose to streamline the narrative, but in doing so they sacrificed the eerie, melancholy tone that made St. Mungo's such a powerful moment in the books. Agnes was not merely a character, she was part of the atmosphere. Her removal left the world feeling cleaner, safer, and less real. One cannot overlook the symbolic meaning of Agnes's bandaged face. In a world where appearances mattered, where blood status, family legacy, and schoolhouse often defined a person's place, Agnes had no visible face, no identifying features. She became, quite literally, an invisible victim of magic. She wasn't evil, and she wasn't heroic. She was merely broken by a spell or curse or potion, and that was enough to sideline her for life. The books didn't need to spell out what had happened. Her silence was explanation enough. But in the visual medium of film, her absence became a form of erasure, as if such people, such fates, didn't exist. Agnes also served a deeper literary function. She was the inverse of the glorified magical adventure. While Harry was wielding wands and flying on broomsticks, Agnes was sitting in a chair in a room where time stood still. Her character questioned the romanticism of magic. She was not brave like a Gryffindor, nor clever like a Ravenclaw. She was not an agent of action at all. And yet, by simply existing in the text, she drew the reader into a sobering thought. What happens when magic goes too far? Who catches those who fall through the cracks? This question became especially important when paralleled with the Longbottoms. Frank and Alice, former Aurors, suffered their fate at the hands of dark magic. Their tragedy was one of violence. Agnes's tragedy, however, felt older, quieter. It was never explained whether her condition had a name. The reader was left to imagine. Was it a botched curse, a potion gone wrong, a magical experiment she'd performed on herself, or had someone else done this to her? The lack of detail made her more terrifying. She was the embodiment of the unknown risks that came with living in a magical society. In this way, Agnes mirrored what many real-world mental health patients experience: the isolation, the silence, the lack of clear diagnosis. Her muttering, nonsensical though it seemed, could be interpreted as a cry from a broken consciousness. In a world where even Severus Snape could bottle fame and brew glory, here was a woman wrapped in gauze and forgotten. It was easy to cheer when spells worked, when potions healed, but Agnes reminded us that not every magical outcome ended with applause. Her life was not a plot twist. It was a slow, quiet unraveling. What made her even more haunting was the effect she had on Harry. Though he never spoke to her, the room with Agnes and the Longbottoms stayed with him. It was one of the first times he truly saw the long-term cost of Voldemort's war, not in terms of death, but in terms of the living who could no longer function. The books used Agnes as emotional shading. She was there to unsettle, not to entertain. In the same way that Moaning Myrtle gave voice to a murdered child, Agnes gave presence to those damaged in ways that had no magical cure. The idea that St. Mungo's could house people like Agnes, whose conditions defied naming, added necessary depth to the wizarding world. Not all spells could be reversed. Not all magical creatures were charming, and not all magical people could be saved. Agnes, with her cloth-bound face and haunting whispers, was a living, breathing piece of magical collateral. And yet, her entire existence was eliminated from the visual narrative. The films, by skipping over her, created a more sanitized, more palatable version of the magical world, one without such uncomfortable truths. By choosing to exclude Agnes, the films lost more than just a minor character. They lost the tension between light and dark, healing and harm. They lost the idea that the wizarding world, for all its wonder, had places like Janus Thicky Ward, places that reminded us that magic, unchecked or misunderstood, could do more than hurt. It could hollow, it could erase, it could turn a human being into a whisper behind a bandaged face. Agnes was a testament to J.K. Rowling's willingness to include the incomplete, the unresolved. In literature, such characters are rare, ones that don't serve the plot directly but deepen the world instead. Her mutterings, her silence, her stillness, they were all louder than any spell cast on screen. Through her we were asked not to fear Dark Lords alone, but the quieter, lonelier fates that magic sometimes reserved for its victims. Number 24, Wendalin the Fearsome. In the magical world of Harry Potter, history breathes beneath every stone of Hogwarts, murmurs through the forbidden pages of the restricted section, and lingers in the very air that witches and wizards breathe. Yet in the cinematic adaptation of this rich universe, many of these echoes from the past were silenced in favour of brisk storytelling. Among the most glaring omissions was the tale of Wendalin the Gory, a legendary witch from the medieval era whose story did not unfold within the time frame of Harry's adventures, but whose mythological presence added gravity to the magical world's past. Her name surfaces only briefly in famous witches and wizards cards, a collectible item most fans will recognize from Ron's obsession with chocolate frog packaging. Despite her fleeting mention, Wendalin embodied the resilience, creativity, and defiance that defined so many magical heroes. Her repeated escape from Muggle executions wasn't just comical folklore, it was a symbol of magical resistance and survival through centuries of persecution. The wizarding world is old, centuries old, millennia perhaps. Its history stretches far beyond Dumbledore, Grindelwald, and even the founders of Hogwarts. Gwendolin's legend roots itself in a time when witches were hunted, not just feared, and when the line between myth and truth blurred like mist over the forbidden forest. Her name might have brought a chuckle to Harry when he read it, imagining a cackling witch evading torch-wielding villagers. But the truth behind her story offered more than a joke. It was a reflection of how magic endured under the weight of human misunderstanding. The official chocolate frog card reads, famous for being burned at the stake no fewer than 47 times in various disguises. Wendalin enjoyed the experience and used a flame-freezing charm to transform the fire into a pleasant, tickling sensation. While the movies chose to focus their lenses on the urgent drama of present-day Voldemort and his Death Eaters, J.K. Rowling's books repeatedly reminded us that magic was not born yesterday. From Bathilda Bagshot's A History of Magic to the whisperings about Emmerich the Evil and Herpo the Foul, the wizarding world's identity was built on the bones and stories of its elders. Wendalin the Gory stood among these ancient figures not only as a survivor, but as a magician whose creativity and humour outwitted mortal danger. Her existence, even if legendary, formed part of the magical psyche. Witches and wizards were not victims. They adapted, they endured, and they even laughed in the face of execution. There is a deliberate absurdity in Gwendolin's tale that underscores how magic subverts the mundane. When Muggles tried to burn her at the stake, they believed they were extinguishing evil, but Wendalin turned agony into tickles. The flame-freezing charm, while a common defensive spell by modern standards, took on an entirely new meaning in her hands. It wasn't just about survival, it was about transformation, turning pain into joy, death into mockery. Wendalin laughed where others would have screamed. Her story doesn't just entertain. It reveals the spiritual defiance of the magical community during its darkest hours. There is a tragedy in her absence from the films. Not because her role was vital to Harry's journey. It wasn't. But because her omission stripped the magical world of one of its essential qualities, depth. Gwendolen may not have cast a single spell during the Battle of Hogwarts, but her legacy would have lived in every young witch or wizard who knew that their history was not defined solely by Voldemort's darkness. Her story reminded readers that wizarding courage was not invented in the 20th century. It was passed down in whispers, etched into chocolate frog cards, and lived on in magical memory. Imagine a brief scene, perhaps set during one of the Hogwarts history classes, with a bewitched tapestry fluttering to life as Professor Binns dully mentions Gwendolen's name. The flames would curl around her animated form, only to be transformed into feathers and giggles as a chorus of Muggle onlookers gawked in confusion. Even a few seconds of such visual storytelling could have grounded the magical world in its deeper roots. It would have shown that the wizarding world was not just a battlefield between Harry and Voldemort, but a civilization that had suffered, learned, and endured far before and beyond that conflict. The books made it clear that the wizarding world possessed a living history, not just an academic one. Ghosts roamed the corridors, portraits argued in oil, and chocolate frog cards captured fragments of legend. In the Philosopher's Stone, when Harry opens his first chocolate frog and receives the Albus Dumbledore card, he also reads about others like Morgana and Circe. Gwendolen's inclusion in this pantheon wasn't accidental. She represented a different type of legacy, not power or wisdom, but survival and absurdity, and that too was magic. Her absence in the films reflects a broader pattern of how the cinematic adaptation treated magical history. The rich lore of wizarding mythology, including tales like the founding of Ilvermorny, the legend of the Peverell brothers, and even the backstory of wand lore, were minimized or worse, erased. The world felt smaller, more contemporary, more action-driven. That may have satisfied the demands of pacing and screenwriting, but it robbed audiences of the sense that they were witnessing a civilization, not merely conflict. Gwendolen's absence wasn't just the loss of a gag, it was the erasure of a worldview. This is particularly striking when we recall how the books themselves emphasized the importance of magical history. Dumbledore often reminded his students, especially Harry, that knowledge of the past was essential. In the Order of the Phoenix, he says, "You need to know history. You need to understand why Voldemort is so dangerous." And yet, the movies rarely gave voice to the centuries of magical life that informed the present. Gwendolen could have been a moment of comic relief, yes, but also a reminder of how long wizards have been misunderstood, hunted, and forced to use ingenuity in place of brute strength. Moreover, characters like Luna Lovegood or Professor Trelawney, who thrived in the margins of magical logic, would have been perfect conduits for referencing Gwendolen. Luna's fascination with odd creatures and overlooked stories made her a natural believer in such whimsical legends. If anyone would have quoted Gwendolen's experience as spiritual proof that pain could be transmuted into joy, it would be Luna. Yet the films left such opportunities untouched, streamlining their narrative at the cost of richness and resonance. Gwendolen's tale also served as a subtle commentary on Muggle and wizarding relations. The Muggles, believing themselves righteous, enacted executions with fire and fury, but they misunderstood what they were trying to destroy. Gwendolen didn't fight back with dark magic or vengeance. She didn't harm her captors, she outwitted them. She played with them. She turned their cruelty into a prank. In a universe where so much magic is associated with violence and power, her story was refreshing in its playfulness and grace under pressure. Even the name, Wendalin the Gory, carries a clever paradox. One expects bloodshed and terror. Instead, one gets giggles and a woman who made death laughable. She was called Gory, not because she caused gore, but perhaps because her repeated returns from the ashes disturbed the Muggle psyche. She embodied the idea that you cannot destroy magic, not truly. You can suppress it, ban it, fear it, but it returns, it adapts, it smiles. Gwendolen's myth lives on even if the flames did not. There's something inherently magical about legends like hers. They serve the same function as fairy tales, myths, and folklore do in our own world. They pass on lessons, values, warnings. They enrich the texture of the universe we're invited into. Just as King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table define a certain flavour of British mythology, figures like Gwendolen define the soul of the wizarding world. Her story wasn't meant to be dissected with logic. It was meant to be felt. The joy of a tickle where once there was terror, the laughter in the face of doom. Ultimately, it is not just Gwendolen's tale that was lost, but the message it carried, that wit can be mightier than wand, that history is not always solemn, and that legends matter. For all their dazzling effects and powerful performances, the Harry Potter films often traded magic's heart for its spectacle, and in doing so they left behind characters like Gwendolen, strange, forgotten, undefeated. Number 25. Dennis Creevey. Dennis Creevey never made it to the screen. In a world so rich with characters, so vibrant with personalities, and yet so relentlessly focused on the chosen few, Dennis was one of those gems who shimmered quietly in the pages of the books, but was completely absent in the films. He was the younger brother of Colin Creevey, the wide-eyed Gryffindor boy who followed Harry Potter like a loyal shadow during the earlier years at Hogwarts. Dennis arrived a few years later, just as full of admiration and wonder, and his arrival into the magical world offered one of the most endearing, humorous, and touching moments that never translated to the screen. When Dennis first appeared in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, he was just 11, newly sorted into Gryffindor. But what marked his entrance wasn't his age, his blood status, or even his resemblance to Colin. It was the manner in which he literally fell into the story, tumbling into the lake and emerging with such enthusiasm that even Professor McGonagall's sternness couldn't suppress the collective amusement. "Dennis! Dennis! He fell in the lake!" Colin had shouted joyfully in the book. "It was brilliant! Something grabbed him and pushed him back in." This wasn't just comic relief. It was a snapshot of childlike joy, of an untainted eagerness to embrace magic for all its mystery and danger. Dennis Creevey was not simply the younger brother of an excitable fanboy. He became his own person, forged from the same pure-hearted mould as Colin, yet distinct in his own right. Like his brother, he was a Muggle-born, and like his brother, he wore his admiration for Harry Potter like a badge of honour. But Dennis had the added burden of walking in the shadow of a sibling who had already gained a reputation, not for exceptional magical ability or troublemaking, but for undying loyalty to the boy who lived. And Dennis carried that torch forward. The omission of both Creevey brothers from the films was more than just a casting oversight. It was a removal of an emotional layer that could have deepened the audience's connection to the theme that Harry inspired courage in the most unlikely of hearts. The Creevey brothers embodied that message. They weren't powerful, they weren't part of the Golden Trio, they weren't even particularly talented, but they believed in Harry so completely, so innocently, that their belief became a quiet act of rebellion against fear itself. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Dennis was one of the youngest members to join Dumbledore's army. Think about that. A first or second-year student choosing to defy authority, risk expulsion and practice spells in secret, all for the sake of a belief. The DA wasn't just a club, it was a resistance, and Dennis, like Colin, stood in the thick of it. Though Rowling only gives him passing mentions, his presence there spoke volumes. He believed in the truth, he believed in Harry. That kind of bravery, though subtle, was not small. While Colin gets more page time and a fuller arc, especially due to his tragic death in the Deathly Hallows, Dennis lingers as a silent witness to that pain. When Harry finds out that Colin has died during the Battle of Hogwarts, despite being underage and forbidden to fight, it shatters something within him. Colin Creevey, though underage, had sneaked back into the castle and had been killed in the battle. The heartbreak isn't just in Colin's death, it's in the knowledge that someone so young, so enthusiastic, so purely good had died in a war that had nothing to do with glory and everything to do with conviction. The films denied us the closure of seeing Dennis's face when his brother's body was carried out of the castle. They denied us the image of a child, not even a teenager yet, broken by loss, standing among the ruins of a school that had been his dream. In that absence, the audience lost the chance to witness a small but essential truth, that war spares no one, and that even the most innocent are drawn into its cruel web. Dennis's grief would have mirrored Harry's. Not in scale, perhaps, but in sincerity. Dennis Creevey was a reminder that Hogwarts was not just populated by heroes and villains, but by ordinary children whose hearts burned with hope. His scenes in the books are brief, but each one pulses with life. When he joins Colin to cheer for Harry, it's not fandom, it's faith. When he turns up at DA meetings, it's not rebellion, it's courage. These moments may seem minor compared to duels and prophecies, but they are the lifeblood of the world Rowling built, tiny revolutions born from love and trust. Without Dennis, the films missed the opportunity to showcase the ripple effect of Harry's influence. He didn't just lead his close friends into battle, he sparked courage in those far outside his inner circle. Characters like Dennis, like Colin, like even Neville in his earlier days, illustrate the scale of that influence. They show us that belief in something greater can take root in the smallest voices. Moreover, Dennis's story is not just about admiration, it's about loss of innocence. In a magical world brimming with joy and spectacle, Dennis's narrative threads, though underwritten, trace the arc from wonder to reality. He begins in awe of Hogwarts, nearly drowned but laughing, amazed by every detail. He ends, one must presume, amidst the ashes of war, mourning his brother, forced into maturity too soon. That journey, from enchanted child to grieving boy, is powerful, and yet it went unseen. The cinematic omission of Dennis Creevey points to a broader pattern in the adaptation, a prioritization of spectacle over subtlety, of plot over heart. There were many battles, many spells, many deaths, but some of the most meaningful moments in the books were the quiet ones, the soft ripples of emotion behind the tidal wave of action. Dennis could have been one of those moments, a boy who smiled at magic, who fell into a lake and thought it was brilliant, who stood beside his brother in resistance, who was left behind when that brother fell. Imagine the power of a single frame. Dennis, small even among the first years, sitting in the great hall after the final battle, eyes vacant, robes torn, clutching Colin's camera. A camera that would never click again. That image alone could have said more than a dozen explosions, but it never came. And what's worse is that the absence of Dennis left Colin isolated in the films, stripped of the fraternal bond that gave his character greater emotional texture. In the books, the Creevey brothers were a pair, a team of cheerful Muggleborns who looked at the world of wands and dragons not with fear, but with giddy wonder. The loss of Colin, in the absence of Dennis, feels less like the tragedy it was and more like a footnote. The audience doesn't get to see the chain reaction of grief, doesn't feel the full weight of what was lost. Dennis Creevey may have been a minor character in terms of word count, but his emotional weight is undeniable. His story enhances Colin's. His loyalty magnifies Harry's impact. His youth contrasts sharply with the horror of war. All of these elements could have made for an unforgettable cinematic presence, and yet he was left behind. Perhaps that's the true sadness of Dennis's absence, not just that he was forgotten by the filmmakers, but that he represents so many others who stood in the background of the saga, their courage unnoticed, their sacrifices unspoken. The wizarding world was built on the backs of people like Dennis, people who didn't seek glory, who didn't demand attention, but who stood up anyway. Dennis Creevey was one of the smallest soldiers in the war against Voldemort, and like so many small soldiers in history, His fight was real, his loss profound, and his story unfinished.